Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Karen Richards, and she's speaking to us from the UK. Karen has what I think is a very interesting story for those who like stories. And I'll let her tell it rather than me try to summarize it. But her initial awakening was really quite unexpected, I would say, and took place under different circumstances than most people tend to report. So maybe we'll start right in with that and then take it from there.
Sure. I wasn't actually looking for anything called self-realization or enlightenment or awakening, and I was at that particular time in my life going through a lot of stress. I was in a job where I was a critical care sister in the UK.
Sister means like a nurse?
Yeah, like a senior nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a pretty stressful job. I was carrying a cardiac arrest bleep, teaching, training, and all the aspects that go with that, working full time, and understaffed as well. So that was one kind of area of my life that was particularly demanding. I was running a home and doing all the normal things there, cooking, cleaning, mowing the lawn, all the normal things we do. I was also in a relationship at the time which was not particularly supportive, to put it an understatement. And it was just all these things were coming at the same time. There were personal issues to do with family going on as well. There was also an incident with my car which needed to be dealt with. And so there was all these different aspects of life that were seemingly coming together at one particular time, and my health started to suffer. And I had several periods where I was off work, unwell, and things just seemed to get worse and worse, and I went back to work and things were really not great. The management structure in the job that I was doing weren't supporting what the help that I was requiring at that time.
And you're pretty young, so you must have been very young then, like early 20s or something, right? I mean...
Oh, bless you. I'm actually 37 now, so I was 33
Okay.
when all this was happening, so early 30s.
I know how to compliment a lady.
Don't you? Yeah, so it was pretty tough, and as I say, my health was just declining, and I started getting colds and being sick and having time off work. And towards the end of the year, because this was kind of building up, I guess, over a couple of years, but towards the end of the second year, I just basically ended up with a cold, a really bad flu episode, and I didn't recover. And I was diagnosed around that time with having an underactive thyroid and chronic fatigue, because I didn't respond to treatment for my thyroid condition.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like there was a almost complete mental and physical shutdown, brought me to a bit of a full stop. And around that time, I was talking with a friend of mine who said that it didn't make sense what I was saying, and he had something that he wanted me to listen to. It didn't make sense in the sense that I was, young, bright, outgoing, seemingly having all these things going for me, and then my life was a complete disaster in every way.
Yeah.
And so he said, I've got this material that I would like you to listen to, this tape, and I had no idea what it was, and I went to spend the day with him talking about stuff and going through things, and he'd actually forgotten about this information that he'd mentioned, so I reminded him about it. So we sat down and he put on this recording. We were just sat in a house in Bridge North in Shropshire, and he just put it on, and we were sat drinking a cup of tea, and it was a guy that I now know to be John Wheeler the non-dual teacher from the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And basically within the first 10 minutes, I just looked to my friend and he said, he's saying we are awareness. And he said yes. And at that moment, that pointer seemed to create an opportunity for what the word was pointing to be recognized experientially.
Mm-hmm.
There was a recognition of myself as the emptiness in which everything is appearing and dissolving, and that they're not two. And it was a timeless moment of recognition that seemed to then fundamentally affect how life was seen and experienced from that moment on, even though nothing had changed.
And you had no background of interest in this kind of thing, or meditation practice, or any such thing?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
There was always, if I think about it, an active inquiry into what life is all about from a very, very young age. I remember around the age of 7 or 8 asking my mum a question. Where was I before I was here? And I remember her looking at me all confused and saying, well, nowhere. And I remember it making absolute no sense whatsoever at that time. And I was interested in life after death, so I was reading a lot of books, and I'd had a lot of kind of psychic and mysterious experiences, which had kind of prompted that as an active investigation, I guess. And around the age, I think I must have been around 14 or 15, I remember sitting in my bedroom in complete silence, asking the question, well, where am I? What am I? Am I in my heart? Am I in my head? And I was unable to locate myself. And after the awakening experience happened, that experience at the age of 14 or 15 or whenever it was, seemed to make perfect sense. But in my later teens, I guess, I was continuing to read books like The Road Less Traveled, M. Scott Peck's spiritual psychology book, and Khalil Gibran's poetry. So there was kind of a loose interest, but not in the wider aspects of Advaita or anything like that.
It sounds like there was definitely a proclivity toward this kind of thing then. It's not like you were just knocking back beers every night and then all of a sudden bingo. There was some sort of attraction to, the Gita has this verse where it says, Arjuna asks Krishna, well, what happens to a person if he's on the path to enlightenment and he dies, and Krishna said, well, in his next lifetime he just picks up where he left off. And of course a lot of traditions say that, and some people don't believe in reincarnation and this and that, but I tend to feel like, and I see it, a trend, where people who have awakenings very often show sort of symptoms of an affinity with this earlier in life, and it makes sense to me. I have no way of knowing whether it's true that we're the span of evolution is really quite vast, and we may very well have done our spiritual homework, in previous lives or something, and then there's a kind of a readiness for an awakening, which can be triggered by the slightest thing. So it's not like it just happened for no reason whatsoever. You may have done all sorts of practice or been with teachers, and some people actually have, like Adyashanti, for instance, whom I interviewed about a month ago. When he had his, I guess it was his second major awakening, he was walking across the living room, and all these images flashed of previous lives that he had lived, which he said are in some sense right now in the present, but he could sort of see into each one and realize that he had built up a tendency toward interest in spirituality and awakening, which had finally come to fruition. it's all very theoretical and hypothetical and whatnot to talk that way, but I just thought I'd throw it out there.
No, no, it's interesting,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to interrupt your story, but we have plenty of time, so I just wanted to
Sure,
throw that in.
sure. Where did I get to? You'll have to probably keep prompting me.
Well, you were talking about, you how much stress you had been under, and then you sat down and listened to John Wheeler and had this
Mm,
awakening, and everything shifted. And that's pretty much where
yeah,
you got off.
yeah. So it was like waking up in hell, what I perceived to be hell in terms of my own personal experience. I mean, of course, there are a lot more hellish things that go on in the world than what I was going through. But
Well, you
yeah,
already were experiencing the hell aspect, with all your your pressures and your health situation. But now you've woken up in hell. You're saying.
yeah, that was
So
kind of it.
it's like, how the hell did I get here?
Yeah, and because there was such a state of physical and mental exhaustion, there was no option other than to really surrender to what had been realized.
Mm.
I spent practically 2 years in bed.
After this awakening?
Yeah,
Wow. Huh.
yeah, it was time where I was very, very physically incapacitated. And
Did,
there's still remnants of that evident today. A lot of lack of stamina and different things, but obviously there's been vast improvement
did you have to quit
since
your
then.
job and all?
I lost my job.
Yeah, because your health was so poor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. This is
So,
tangential, and we won't discuss it now. But you might want to also check into adrenal problems, because sometimes thyroid problems are not the whole story. But anyway, let's not get into that. um,
I did
so,
bring that up actually with my consultant, but
oh, good.
so it's yeah,
You've been checking. Good.
yeah.
Um, so that's an interesting thing too, and it also I don't want to keep referring to Adyashanti, but it reminds me of his situation where he had this awakening, and then it's almost as if nature said, "Okay, kid, we're gonna reset your buttons here. So here, get nice and sick and stay in bed for 6 months." And so he went into this. In fact, the same thing happened to Saint Francis of Assisi. He came back from the Crusades or whatever it was, and he had this sort of spiritual experience. Actually, he got totally sick, almost died, and then woke up out of that with a spiritual realization. It's almost like if we really have to shift gears in a big way,
Yeah,
nature knocks us flat.
right. And it did feel a little bit like that, if I'm honest.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, just totally resetting everything because so much seems to have changed in a personal sense, if we can call it that, even though it isn't personal.
Hmm.
But there was just a complete realigning, as I see it, with life as it truly is, because everything seemed to be so out of alignment. Of
Hmm.
course, we can never ultimately be out of alignment because everything is it. But in terms of how it was being experienced, it was just a dysfunction at every possible angle.
Yeah.
And so when all the lenses fell away, or the certain fundamental lenses fell away, then there was just this seeing of everything as it truly is. But the outer manifestation of life had to shift.
Yeah.
And in order for that to happen, something pretty fundamental had to happen, I guess,
I,
to
I
enable that.
I think that's happening to the world right now, actually. We're seeing all kinds of institutions crumbling and things that used to work not working anymore and stuff. And
Yeah,
I suspect that that's because there's a lot of change has to take place for the shift in consciousness that's taking place to
absolutely.
really happen. So what happened? How long you were like flat on your back more or less for a couple of months, you say?
I was kind of going through this boom and bust. I was still pretty determined to try and do things. And
Hmm.
so um, a lot of time I was physically unable to, but then there was still shopping and cooking and those kind of things and trying to have some sort of social life on some level, but it
Hmm.
was obviously greatly reduced to what it
Yeah.
was. So often people only used to see me when I got a bit of energy to be able to engage for a couple of hours. But then it was back to being a hermit in the house, effectively.
There's actually a book by that name, A Hermit in the House.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, it's a book about Maharishi Mahesh Yogi staying with some people when he first started his teaching mission, and then he was living in their house, and so they wrote this beautiful little book called A Hermit in the House. So did you eventually then, obviously you're much more active now, you're traveling all over the world and doing things, so obviously you came out of that phase, so kind of elaborate.
Well, I guess things just started to snowball by themselves. And there is still a lot of lack of stamina, so it's not like I'm kind of running here, there, and everywhere. That's not really what's happening. But things just seem to start to take shape. I mean, I was just using Facebook actually as a way of sharing insights through status updates. And from that place, all manner of things started to open up. And opportunities started to come in very organically, just through sharing that from that platform. And I'm just very, very open and receptive to life and whatever comes, and saying yes to it now. And for a long time, that wasn't the case. There was almost, a sense of really just withdrawing and not saying yes, really just almost marinating, I guess, in what's always here, just taking a complete step back. So I recognized that perhaps some aspects of that were hindering embracing life in its fullness.
Yeah. Well, as Ecclesiastes says, there's a time to marinate and a time to say yes, or something along that. I'm paraphrasing very roughly, but I think it's appropriate that you had that withdrawal phase. You needed that, and then it's later appropriate to get more engaged.
Yeah. So that's really how everything started to unfold, from starting to say yes and just responding to what comes up really very naturally. There's this moving from seeking satisfaction and happiness in the world to just allowing everything to be and responding from a conscious place to what is arising in an experiential sense.
Yeah.
So that started to snowball more and more.
Is there a sense that, you're saying yes to things because there's a sort of a wisdom inherent in the whatever is orchestrating the flow of events in life, and you can trust that to be in your best interest, so if when you just flow and say yes and so on, then things tend to work out in unexpected ways.
Yeah, and flow and say no too.
Yeah, if necessary. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just really being in tune with what is going on, and really listening to what is and what feels right. It's like on a feeling, intuitive level.
Yeah.
Somehow.
It's a good point, because I think sometimes people feel that just flowing with things as they unfold implies throwing your discrimination out the window. But it doesn't necessarily, because that's also a useful faculty.
Yeah, it's almost like your ability to know this, where to go, becomes more finely tuned. So it isn't just saying yes to everything, it's really saying yes and no appropriately.
Right. So you're kind of hinting at what I'm going to ask next, in a way, which is, we've talked a little bit about the changes in the external circumstances of your life, not being able to work and being sick for a while and then getting more active again. But how has the subjective or inner experience corresponded with that? In what way has that matured or evolved or clarified or whatever since that initial awakening?
Oh, vastly.
Let's talk about that.
It's like the way I see awakening is like a beginningless beginning of true experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in the process, paradoxically, even though we recognize ourselves to be in that moment of awakening, that which is awake, we are at the same time awakening to that which is already awake simultaneously. And so there's always a deeper and deeper opportunity to see through what is not
Mm-hmm.
in each and every moment. And what's seen here is that there can be very, very subtle tendencies operating. And it's almost so familiar. It's like putting on a pair of glasses that you've always seen through and everything looks fine. But it's only when you take the glasses off, it only seems to be when something falls away
Mm.
that you really notice that it was even there.
Interesting.
Because it's just so familiar, it seems completely natural and normal. It's like so familiar, it's unnoticed.
Yeah, Adyashanti was saying the same thing in his interview because I asked him a similar question. He kept saying, "Well, it's like things keep falling away, and I didn't even realize they were there until they were gone."
Right, right,
Yeah.
right,
Huh.
right.
And
And so
go
I was
ahead.
just
I'm
gonna
sorry. Yeah,
I was just
please.
going to say I don't actually see this as ever stopping. It hasn't so far.
Right. Yeah. Um, so that's an interesting point because in some non-dual or spiritual circles, there's progress is a dirty word. There's and a number of people that I speak with, I say, well, do you see any sort of improvement or whatever over time? And they say, no, I can't possibly see how anything could change or be any different than this. But that doesn't jibe with my experience, and it doesn't jibe apparently with yours, or with, and in a way, it's true. They're right. There's a dimension which isn't going to improve or change or anything, but
Totally.
that's not the entirety of it.
Right, right. There's this dichotomy
Yeah,
almost.
yeah.
It's like a halfway house. I see it as a halfway house. Emptiness is a perspective
Hmm.
in that which knows emptiness. And so in realizing with a nothing in which everything is arising and dissolving, to stay in nothing is really only a perspective. It's like a halfway house
Hmm.
in the full journey of embracing what's always here. It's like an imaginary journey back to the point you never left. There has to be this breaking of apparent identification. And in order to do that, the emptiness that you truly are needs to be recognized. But then, if it's true recognition, it's recognized in its fullness,
Mm.
in an experiential sense. And so, a lot of what happens in terms of the falling away, it's like all of those things that seem to happen in the early story, in the early part of the experience, get seen through with increasing clarity.
The early part of the experience of life, or the early part of experience of awakening?
The early part of experience of the human story of the individual.
So your first 33 years or whatever, in other words.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Particularly the first maybe 10, and then how those patterns get repeated later on.
Okay. So when you say things are falling away, just to dwell on this for a minute, you're talking about ingrained patterns or impressions or tendencies or habits or whatever that you grew up with that now are dropping off one by one.
Right. We could describe it like that.
Yeah.
Like skins of an onion.
Yeah.
But ultimately everything's perfect. Everything is as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately what is needs no purification because it's already pure.
Right.
And yet in an experiential sense there seems to be this refinement to what is already pure.
Mm-hmm. Well, one analogy that might help with it is, the sun is shining, and it's always been shining. But, if there are a lot of clouds, then we don't see the sun. And so, maybe there's a peep in the clouds, a break, and we see the sun shining. And so, the sun is starting to shine. Of course, it's not starting to shine. It's always been shining. But then there could be, like, all kinds of degrees of clearing away of clouds. And, of course, it's just an analogy, and it's rough, but I think people tap into this realization that, oh, I've always been this awareness or this emptiness or this fullness or whatever you want to call it. But the question is it really a living reality, you know?
Right.
And how much and how full a living reality could it become,
Right.
you know? Um, so
Definitely.
that's where the real uh,
Y- Yeah, I think there can be a tendency, a danger almost, to live this recognition from a memory
mm,
rather than meeting it fresh. A living realization, as you say, in each and every moment.
yeah, to live it as a memory or to even live it as an understanding, perhaps based upon a previous glimpse which gave you that understanding. And you know, yeah, good point.
Mm, yeah.
And to me this is not to me this is a kind of a wonderful aspect of the whole thing, a fascinating aspect, which is that it's exciting really, because you know the question arises, well, how much can be cleared away, how fully can this be lived, you know, to and that, and as you said earlier, there seems to be no end to it. So life becomes this wonderful sort of adventure of, you know, discovery and
Totally. It's like a magical mystery tour of
yeah.
pure experiencing. You don't know
Hmm.
what's going to happen next, or it's amazing.
Yeah.
Totally amazing.
Uh-huh.
Just responding to things as they present themselves. Just
Yeah.
because.
Just because what?
Just because it's so. Just because it is.
Yeah. And it's not only amazing and adventure and all that in terms of the things that happen as they present themselves, but also, wouldn't you say, I'd like to frame this more in terms of questions than me making statements, but also in terms of your inner perspective on those things or events or whatever, and how that grows.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, we can find ourselves responding in a totally different way um, in circumstances where we would have behaved in a completely different way.
Hmm.
You know, every conditioned aspect can be trying to wheel its way in to try and manipulate experiencing and try and control things. And that can be seen through. And so it's almost like conscious responding takes over, even though the conditioned aspect may be trying to muscle its way in through the door.
Mm.
And so there's a knowing from the heart right action, even if it seems to go completely against what would have been done before.
Mm. Nice point. Yeah. And there can be, I guess, a little tug of war between the two, where you were sort of just saying this, where the conditioned aspect is saying, "Let's do it my way,"
Yeah.
and the knowing from the heart is saying, I'm going to do it this way."
And ultimately there's no choice.
Right. Huh. You you seem very articulate with all this. I mean, since your awakening, did have you read a lot of books in order to acquire the terminology, or you know, listen to a lot of other songs and whatnot, or did this start just kind of coming naturally to you
I
from?
would say I haven't read extensively.
Hmm.
Because of the chronic fatigue, there was an inability to digest great reams of text.
Mm.
And still that's problematic, and still writing lots is problematic as well. And so I did start collecting books of a mainly kind of traditional orientation, I guess, but it's probably a passage that I would read
Yeah.
over a cup of tea, or um, I just feel it starts to bubble up. The language of the heart is its own authority, and
Mm.
so it starts to spill over and find its own expression. That's the beauty of it. You don't need to have read extensively, although there can be many um, gems of wisdom in terms of the process of integration that can be gleaned from reading
Hmm.
certain aspects of text. But I would say, because I've been inspired to do my own writing A
Oh.
book has been formulating for a couple of years. I didn't want to contaminate the expression with other influences.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it to be something that was spoken in ordinary language and not and my own language, my own words, in a way that feels right here, that can reach a lot of people in a way, because I guess I think I'm just trying to find the right way to put it. It's like the the subculture can actually be quite limiting.
Explain that.
The spiritual subculture,
Yeah.
this type of text only appeals to a small number of people. I would never have gone to Advaita, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I would never have picked up the Bhagavad Gita or, Ramana's teachings at that point.
Right.
And so it's finding a way to make what this fundamentally is about accessible to a wider audience that I think
Yeah.
is so key.
How are you doing that? What sort of things are you saying in this book?
Well, the structure is there. There's not many words on the pages yet, but it's going to be an exploration from looking at life from how it's commonly experienced, so through the eyes of suffering, through the eyes of separation, and asking the deeper questions, and then looking at awakening and what awakening is, and hopefully giving some clear pointers to that, and then looking at all the subsequent traps that can arise prior to and post awakening, and then look at basically the journey of integration and how that shifts and evolves and what to look out for, and make it a live text so that it's not just me sharing a viewpoint. It's actually something someone can take on board themselves and inquire by asking directly and investigating directly, because otherwise it's like reading books on cookery. You can learn it parrot fashion, but unless you actually experientially taste what this is talking about, all the words in the world are useless. So
I very strongly agree. I really think that you know knowledge or information you can get from a book is just really the icing on the cake. The main cake is experience, and
yeah.
However that is attained or discovered, then that's really what needs to happen.
Yeah, so it's going to be kind of an overview of conscious living, I guess, what
Let's
that means.
I wish I had been able to write fast enough. I wasn't writing at all, but to take notes on the points that you just said in that book. But I'm sure you've got them in your mind, and I wouldn't mind spending the next half hour or so exploring that point by point. And maybe I could ask you some questions that'll even help to stimulate your writing of the book or something. So let's go through that again from the A to Z as you outlined it.
Well, the first aspect really is for where they are.
I'm sorry, there was a glitch in the audio there. The first aspect
Yeah.
was
meeting people where they are,
meeting
looking at
people
the
where they
world
are.
through their eyes.
Uh-huh.
And I remember seeing the world that way. I can recall it. I can recall what that felt like, what the experience of that was. And I think it's very important to never lose sight of that. Even though it's dropped away, it can be recalled because it
Sure.
was part of the experiencing for so long. And so meeting someone where they are almost provides this platform of understanding, of mutual respect, of commonality, that is essential for anything deeper to be heard. Because otherwise it just closes the communication down right from the offset.
I think that's a great place to start, and I think it's something that not all exponents or teachers do. Very often they just speak from their level of experience and expect people to relate to it. And what you're saying is you got to step one should be to tune into
Yeah.
people where they are. Otherwise, what's the point in trying to communicate?
And there is no other ultimately.
No other person. You mean?
Right.
Right.
There is only life. And so meeting life as it is, as appropriate to the moment,
Mm-hmm.
is to be in experiential true alignment with what is.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost can seem totally contradictory to the message of freedom to actually meet someone in their suffering, but it's almost like the foundation for really having access to a powerful message.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, the one way of phrasing it would be to teach according to the level of consciousness of the listener, or the
Yeah,
level of experience of the listener, and
yeah,
and that applies to anything. I mean, it applies to teaching, grade school or something. You don't teach kids trigonometry in the second grade or something. You teach them um, arithmetic or whatever is appropriate for them, and then as time goes on, they get to trigonometry, and that's not to sound demeaning or condescending or anything like that. It's a practical way of approaching it.
right. And it's meeting life without an agenda
Hmm.
and seeing what opens up. And we never know.
Yeah, the image of water comes to mind. Water flows naturally in the direction of the slope, even though it may seem to be a sort of a devious route, going this way and that, but it's actually going by the most direct route given the terrain that it's flowing through.
Totally. I love that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Cool. So in writing the book, how would you meet people where they are in when you first start presenting the material? How do you practically do that?
Well, it's so different. Each and every encounter is so different.
But if you're
It,
writing a book, you're speaking to a more general audience.
oh, I
So
see what you mean. Okay.
how do you know who's going to read the book, and how can you possibly, you know, um,
Well, I
match?
guess I don't. Is the answer to
Yeah.
that. um, all I can go with is my memory of how life was lived prior to what was seen.
Hmm.
And so right from that place of, wanting peace and happiness, which is a fundamental desire, deep desire that everyone has, if we really look for it. And looking at all the obscurations to that, the apparent obscurations,
Hmm.
and investigating that and asking the deeper questions as a platform. Because a lot of the time people are asking these questions anyway, and they just don't know how to, get out of that modality. It's always in things, trying to find happiness in things or in circumstance. That's the
Mm.
conditioned aspect of self. Um, so it's really putting the spotlight on that in a way that can perhaps open up a deeper investigation.
Yeah. And I don't suppose you would tell them that there's anything wrong with that. It's natural, People naturally do what they do,
Yeah,
but perhaps that tendency to try to find happiness in things is symptomatic of a deeper quest.
definitely. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it makes a huge experiential difference to life, to the experience of life, whether we're identified or not.
Hmm.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter, but
Right.
experientially, it seems to matter hugely
Mm.
and is the key to unlocking the peace that's always available.
Huh. So what is the key again, exactly?
I forgot what I just said.
Oh, well, we were talking about how, typically people try to find their satisfaction in things, and, relationships and possessions and whatnot, and how that's, if you're going to meet people where they are, then you have to kind of acknowledge that. And how perhaps it's not unnatural for people to do that. It's what everyone's doing, billions of people. But then, perhaps that very tendency to seek happiness in things can be seen as a symptom of, or can be actually used in the service of finding happiness in something which actually is capable of providing it. I think that's what you're getting at.
Right. Go on, whatever it was.
Huh. And then I was asking you, well, how are you going to accommodate the different, all the different perspectives there of the people who may be reading your book? Because if you want to meet them where they are, how can you do that, not knowing where they are?
Okay, okay. I
Yeah.
think one aspect that I considered doing is using an autobiographical component to illustrate my life experience,
I
for
think that's
them
good.
to then investigate their own life experience. And then I can also use that autobiographical component in the later chapters to see how, so it can be used as an example of how I created certain perceptions, certain realities for myself based on that conditioning and those perceptions operating. So through using my own example, it hopefully will inspire someone to ruthlessly investigate their own experience and see how certain things are being perceived as a result of conditioned tendencies.
You can call it autobiography of a yogini.
I think that's been done already. I think Yogananda might be onto me for copyright.
Yeah, but he just used the masculine. You can use the feminine.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all
Yeah.
takes shape.
Well, I think that's a good way to start, and I think that it's been my observation that teachers who have sort of really gone through it as a person, before their realization, rather than just sort of waking up to it one morning without having really experienced some of not life's bumps and knocks, end up being more effective in a way because they can really relate to people where they are if they remember to do that. And
Right, and I
yeah,
think that this is key, actually.
yeah. So what was the next phase of the book that you outlined?
We're really looking at what awakening is, so moving on from the deeper questions and actually, exploring, well, what's this life about? And really giving some key pointers that make experientially obvious what always is the case, that which
Okay.
never changes, amidst all change. We know we've
So
always been ourselves. We know we exist.
so is that so then what? Looking at what awakening is, what is awakening?
Well, I would describe awakening as an experiential recognition, a personal experiential recognition of timeless, impersonal consciousness. So it's such a paradox because it happens to a person in the absence of a person.
And it happens in time. You might say, well, it happened last
Yes.
Thursday or something.
Yes.
Yeah, it is a paradox. Yeah.
Yeah.
And perhaps elaborate a bit on that that recognition of the timeless, as it dawned in your experience.
Wow.
How did you know it was timeless, for instance, and how did you know it was, impersonal or empty or whatever else it was?
Gosh, that's such a hard question. It's like almost an impossible question to answer. It was just what is clear and obvious was known to be myself. And it was like breaking of the shell of the person as the identity, but not being in denial of the way experience is seemingly happening, and which this expression is part of that, is part of the totality of seamless experience.
So not being in denial means you didn't sort of say to you, so I mean you would still say, I am Karen and I live here and I have this
Yeah.
health problem and I have that job and this is my cat, and so in other words you still spoke and thought and
Right,
in terms of the personal, but there was this whole new element that had
seen in
woken
context
context of a larger reality.
of the expanse of life. Yeah, just it was like in a timeless moment I was seeing that I was nothing and I was seeing that I was everything, which included this small aspect of the totality of experiencing.
Mm.
Instead of just being identified with this,
Right.
there was this breaking of that to nothing, to everything, all in one seamless, timeless moment.
That's beautifully put. And did you lose it again after a while? I mean, did you wake up a week later and think, "Oh God, I'm just this little Karen person now"? What happened to that wonderful thing I had?
It was never lost,
Mm-hmm.
but what I would say was there were certain identities that were running more strongly than others at certain times. It was very intermittent, because there was still a lot of physical, constraints in terms of the health and all of that kind of thing. And also the practicalities of dealing with the life as it appeared to be as a result of all the identified thoughts, the actions and the consequences, and allowing those to play out in their own time. I often use the analogy of throwing a stone in a pond, and when we try and smooth the ripples, we're creating more ripples, right? So it was just allowing everything to dissipate at its own pace and rate, and just forever returning to recognition.
So when you say practicalities, do you mean like, your finances
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff?
Big,
Stuff you have to deal with.
thing that seems important in the experience that we find ourselves in at this
Yeah.
moment,
Right.
We use money, we need a roof over our head, we need food in the fridge, we need those practical things. We don't need a lot if we think about it, but
Right.
those basic things are required. So taking care of those aspects, really.
Yeah, like they say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
What's enlightenment?
Yeah, right, that, but you know what I mean.
Just teasing.
Yeah, the E word. Okay, so intermittent, so I guess what you're saying is that as life's challenges bombarded you, as they always will, the awakening was sort of challenged, or it was perhaps at times somewhat overshadowed, somewhat less other times. Is that what was there sort of a fluctuation in the clarity of it or the certainty of it, and so on, as various things came at you?
Never in the certainty,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of how reaction may arise from
So
a
in other words,
condition.
you'd react more habitually, or you'd react in a more conditioned way, and other times not.
Right,
Mm.
right,
Okay,
until
gotcha.
that started to fall away. The trust was always there that life
Mm-hmm.
is this, and that never diminished.
Mm-hmm.
But the aspects of, certain experiences arising, re-inviting identification with the
Yeah.
personal in varying degrees of intensity
Mm-hmm.
came like waves with certain experiences that followed. So,
So you're saying that even in the most intense of those experiences, though, there was a certainty or a something that never
yes.
that wasn't shaken.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced the most depths of despair after the awakening experience, which has been cradled in utter peace.
That's interesting. Yeah, because some people would say, "How could you experience despair? Isn't it supposed to be bliss? I mean, where is there
That
any
is
room for?"
bliss. That is the bliss. Knowing that it's okay.
Uh-huh.
All
And
inclusive.
yeah. So even in the midst of the deepest, darkest, times that you've had since then, there's been an undercurrent or a foundation of peace and certainty, and
Yes.
yeah, which is
Certainty and uncertainty.
that's good too.
Total certainty and uncertainty.
Hmm. Which I imagine is the case right this moment, right? I mean, there's this sort of certain, because certainty, the word certainty actually has a fundamentalist connotation to it. I am certain that Jesus is Lord, or I am certain that Muhammad is there's one God and his Allah, or whatever. There's all kinds of people in this world who are absolutely certain about their convictions, but my understanding of genuine awakening is that it is without the taint of fundamentalism to any degree, and is actually a sort of a resting in not knowing, is one way of explaining
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
I mean, it's paradoxical again, because there's a certainty and a complete uncertainty
Right.
simultaneously.
Right.
Yeah. Huh. It's good for people to hear this stuff, sometimes I have this attitude that, well, what's the point in just talking about it all the time? Because it's just, people might try to live it on the basis of merely an understanding. But I think the value in hearing things like this is that, just as when you listen to John Wheeler, I suspect, it enables people to sort of identify elements that they're already living that they hadn't quite noticed, and they think, oh, it's okay to have this uncertainty. That doesn't mean that I'm a confused, messed up person.
Right. I feel this is really beneficial, actually,
Mm-hmm.
because the misunderstanding of that pulls people back into identification.
Yeah.
The allowing of it is instantaneously freeing.
Mm-hmm. It's very good. Okay, so we've covered meeting people where they are, and then we've covered a little bit of a look at how what awakening is by your understanding and experience. And what was next?
I guess looking at the traps potentially that can arise.
Pre and post, or both?
Pre and post, I guess, but I'm still exploring all of those things and finding a way to articulate what's happening.
Let's talk about a few of them that you've come up with so far.
Oh, what have I come up with so far? Well, living realization from a memory, that's a big one.
So in other words, well, you, rather than me try to explain that, what do you mean by that?
Well, just having an experience of awakening and then living from the perspective of identification again. So there's not only living from identification, but there's also living with the identification of an awakened person. Because of course there are no awakened people ultimately.
So in other words, the person might sort of have an awakening that they lose, and then they sort of like hang their hat on having had that awakening. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't see awakening as gaining or losing anything. It's like it opens up. It's an experiential recognition of the timeless. And so that can be memorized. That experiential recognition of the timeless can be memorized and then taken to mean all sorts of things in a personal sense. And then life is being lived largely from identification, or wholly from identification again, with the idea that this awakening experience has transformed something in a way, when really the behaviors and attitudes are still very much coming from a reactive place.
Okay, so why would that happen to a person?
Because thought is very, very manipulative. Thought identification is very, very manipulative and subtle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really being open to all these subtleties and being totally ruthless about what's being experienced in this moment.
So are you saying that happened to you quite a bit, and that you learned how to relax out of it?
I would say there was elements of that, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And through difficulties that continued to arise from the momentum of past conditioning, this was the opportunity to actually see through that and break away from that and allow this to fall away by itself. And just be totally committed to recognizing in each and every moment. And I don't mean getting into a regimented practice about somebody needs to recognize what is all the time, because that can be another trap of
It can be very
identification.
manipulative to do that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But just simply to apply what I would call relaxed vigilance.
It's a nice phrase. Yeah. This whole thing about gaining and losing, I mean, I do know people who say, "Oh, I had this marvelous awakening in 1985, and I was just in a state of bliss for 2 weeks, and I thought that was it, and then I lost it again, and I so long to get back to that." That does happen to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't happen here, but all sorts of other subtle things were playing out here. So, different people are different in terms of what's experienced. And so it's making sure that all the bases are covered. And I think another trap can be it always happens the way it happened here.
Ah, that's another good one. Yeah. Uh, that. In fact, that's one of the reasons I like to sort of, have people kind of tell their stories. And now I've done your number 89 or something in this series, and if you person actually listens to a number of them, it's different for everybody.
Mm.
So it doesn't have to be like Karen or like so and so or whatever.
Right, right. So it's being open to seeing that in context as well. I look at awakening in three main ways, I guess,
Hmm.
awakening experiences. And that is that we can have a radical, sudden awakening, like what
Hmm.
happened here, and I think it's been documented well, I think, for a number of other people, many other people experienced awakening to the timelessness in a sudden, time-bound moment of recognition that seems to fundamentally change how experience is experienced
Hmm.
without changing anything. And then those that seem to go through night turning into day, so it's almost like an invisible transition. And yet if they look back, there can be a time recalled when it wasn't wasn't clear and obvious. And then there can be a momentary glimpse into the timeless, and then all of a sudden everything seems to close down again, and it's lived from identification. Life is being lived from identification. And I think these three main aspects fundamentally color how the subsequent integration, and where people can get caught as well, in various ways with those experiences, really color how life is then integrated as itself.
Mm. It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting to, for somebody to do some kind of a scientific study, really, where they carefully categorized all the sort of, surveyed 1,000 people or something, and broke it down into categories. I bet you'd find that a certain percentage had this sudden irrevocable awakening, and then a certain percentage were oozers, as they say, where it just sort of oozed in so gradually they didn't didn't notice, couldn't put their finger on it. That'd be a fascinating thing for someone to undertake.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I still think, in the vast majority who awaken in a radical sense, there is still an integration process.
Yeah. In fact,
So
I can't think of anyone for whom there isn't, even including some who don't acknowledge that there is, but there probably is.
yeah, I think even Ramana Maharshi went through a period of integration.
Oh yeah. I mean, he went through 20 years after his awakening where he didn't come out and say anything or do
Mm.
anything. And, he just sat and meditated, and yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. In fact, in certain Zen traditions, it's kind of formalized that after one awakens, they don't go out and teach. They're expected to spend 10 years kind of integrating it before they go out and start teaching people.
Yeah, and I think there's a tremendous amount of value to that.
Yeah. Um,
Certainly.
yeah. So, okay, in terms of traps now, we've covered, what have we covered? We've covered, can you reiterate?
Living from a memory,
Okay.
thinking it's always my way in terms of the experiential recognition.
Hmm.
What else did we say?
Or
I'm
that
the wrong person to ask.
or that it has to be so and so's way. Well, that's not it's not
Right.
not happening
Oh,
to me.
right, right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's another one.
the way he describes it isn't happening to me, so I must not be there.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So those are a couple of good ones. Um, I think also maybe you talked about getting kind of ensnared by conditioned tendencies again,
Hmm.
something like that. Any others that come to mind?
Not right now, actually.
Okay, good. I'm helping you
There
write your.
are a lot. I've got a lot written down, but I can't think of anything right now.
Yeah. No, this is good. This is good. Then what's the next major section?
Well, I would say looking at how we can become more conscious as a society,
Hmm.
um, and looking at other ways in which the integration process happens. Um, I I just really feel that it's so important to look in each and every moment at how we're relating to one another. And often relationships provide an ideal basis for which we can explore that. So we're all in the process of becoming more awake to what is already awake together,
Hmm.
because everybody is ourself effectively. And so it's a journey of connectedness. And the human dynamic is so complex. So it would be looking at ways in which to provide people, I guess, with a self-reflection tool to illuminate these conditioned tendencies so that they can be clearly seen in the light of presence. And there is no need to manipulate behavior or experience in any way, to just allow everything to be as it is, but to really see what is happening.
Hmm.
Because often with these glasses are on, it's like an invisibility cloak, I guess. There is just this happening and it's seen through the tendency. So it seems normal, not recognized. And so providing something which illumines what's really going on can be extremely beneficial in the
So
ongoing
what
process.
would you provide?
Well, I'm looking into those sorts of things.
Uh-huh.
I think certainly psychotherapy can play a role
Okay.
um, in looking at conditioned aspects of the idea of self.
Hmm.
And often a lot of these things are unnoticed because they're so familiar. And so obviously psychotherapy, not that I know a great deal about it, but that would look at trying to change behaviors to become this very balanced human being. I
Hmm.
think this isn't about using tools in that way. This is about perhaps using some sort of framework to illuminate what is not so it can be clearly seen and
Hmm.
allowed to be as it is. And then it will be recognized in experience how certain behaviors are actually feeding these dynamics, these unconscious dynamics.
So I get the sense from what you were saying that as someone who runs around teaching satsangs to a certain extent, and maybe sometimes over just Skype, sometimes in person, you feel a kind of a need to find something or some things that can be effective in helping people realize this. You mentioned psychotherapy as a possibility. Do you feel that like, you know, there need to be tools or to help people kind of recognize what you're trying to convey to them?
Ultimately, no.
Right. There's
but
always
I
that.
but I think it can be experientially very helpful to look at how this is lived
Hmm.
from a truly awakened perspective.
And how can a person do that if they don't have a truly awakened perspective? And
Right,
right, it's a catch-22.
right. So it's looking at all the ways that experiencing can be obscured by what is not effectively.
Huh.
So looking at all the ways the conditioned tendencies can be operating that aren't even seen until they're no longer there. So, and the only way they get seen is by truly seeing them. And sometimes something needs to be used in order to bring that into focus. It's like we don't even notice we're breathing
Right.
until the focus is on the breath.
Mm-hmm.
So this is similar in a way as I see it. I've noticed through what's been experienced here that certain aspects of these tendencies can be fully operational in the light of presence. There can be total presence, there can be total clarity, and yet there can be a responding to life from something that isn't even noticed.
Huh. Let's try to clarify that just a little bit.
Oh, this is such a tricky thing to try and discuss, but...
Yeah, it's abstract, but I think you can get it a little bit more concrete.
Okay, so say you're totally present and aware right now,
Mm-hmm.
and then something happens, and there is a responding to what is happening, but the response is actually coming from a learnt behavior rather than from an inspired heart place.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like these tendencies get seen more and more and allowed to be as they are more and more until they fall away or they dissipate by themselves. And so it could almost be said that if we're in denial that they're there, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, that we're not even open to noticing them.
So you're saying that the tendency, I'm letting some animals in and out here.
I can see.
You're saying that oh, wait a minute, we have to introduce officially Leela.
Oh, she's beautiful.
Yeah.
Leela, did you say?
Leela, like play.
Oh, Leela.
Yeah. We won't edit this out. This is for the benefit of all the Buddha at the gas pump fans. This is the official mascot. Okay, so you're saying that, very informal.
Yeah, your house is like Noah's Ark. You've opened that door about 10 times.
I know. That's what I tried other approaches, but none of them worked. So I just opened the door. Otherwise, they scratch or they make a.
I was wondering about leaving my cats the run of the house actually while this interview was taking place, but because they mew behind the door and that kind of thing, but they haven't put in an appearance yet.
So what I think I understand you to be saying that learning to kind of bring your attention to recognize that you're operating from a conditioned pattern rather than sort of a genuine kind of intuitive, spontaneous thing from the heart, and enables those conditioned patterns to dissipate.
Right, because they can be clearly seen. And so a lot of what can be driving our action can be from these unseen tendencies of conditioning. And so in being open to them, it's like experiencing of life itself becomes purer and purer. It's already pure, but these tendencies are falling away, enabling everything to be seen and experienced with an increasing brightness, with an increasing joy. And even if actually we're not open to seeing unseen aspects of ourselves, life often is orchestrating the perfect opportunities for them not to be ignored any longer.
Very good point. Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter.
Right. This thing of it's already, I forget how you phrase it, already pure, already there. The analogy comes to mind. Let's see if you think this fits. Of, let's say a radio signal from a radio station. It's already a perfectly fine signal. It's potentially crystal clear. But if your radio is not tuned in very well, or it's not pointing in the right direction or something, then you're going to get a staticky kind of version of it. It's not and it's not to say that the signal itself needs to be improved, although, you could stretch the analogy and say maybe you're too far away and the signal's weak. But let's say you have a perfectly adequate signal. But in this case, the radio, it needs some adjustment. It needs to be, you need to turn the dial a little bit or move the direction or improve the antenna or something to pick up this signal, which is already perfectly fine the way it is. So this whole thing of, being or pure awareness or silence or peace or whatever is just, it can't be improved upon, is all well and good. But there's, as human radios, there's so much room for becoming better attuned.
Right, and experiencing is constantly shifting and evolving. So to say nothing can be improved is kind of a fixed perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't improve on what is, because what is what is. But in terms of an experiential human journey, there's always a deeper and deeper opportunity to rest into that, to be that.
To actually have that to be a practical living reality, as opposed to a nice notion that everything is,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And often we can be deluding ourselves in the subtlest of ways that sometimes can be, disguised as clarity even.
Yeah. It's interesting in a way because, people whom I've met who would be considered to be famous saints, very widely known around the world, and who have a tremendous presence and a profound influence on lots of people. Even there, when you get to know them well, you see that a lot of their stuff appears to be very much culturally conditioned, certain ways they behave and certain things they believe and so on. And so you wonder if one ever is free of a certain amount of personal and cultural baggage, and maybe it's not necessary to be. And very often people sort of identify those cultural conditionings as characteristic of enlightenment. They think, well, he believes this, therefore that's the enlightened way to believe, and I should believe that too. Or he speaks with a certain intonation in his voice, and so I would speak that way too. And there's something spiritual about that. So I don't know. It's funny. It's just an observation. Maybe you have a comment on it.
Well, even language is conditioned, right? We wouldn't even be able, it's learned. We wouldn't be able to speak to one another. And we haven't moved into the realm of telepathy yet. So
and even if we had, that would be conceptual in a way. We'd have to convey concepts. Yeah.
Right. So, there's always elements of learned behavior. But I guess it's looking at what the behavior is, and is it ultimately self-defeating or not? Is it ultimately kind of reinforcing a belief in a separate self or not?
Yeah.
And so if it's seen in context, like these words are seen in context, then nothing's a problem ultimately. It's whether we're feeding something we're not seeing or not.
It almost seems like the key element is what's predominant. Cat going out and wife going out with cat food. It seems like, what's running the show,
Yeah.
And that's the key question. Which thing has the upper hand?
Right. And being really ruthlessly honest in any moment about that.
And like what you said a minute ago, I thought was interesting, is that conditioning can actually be pulling the strings a lot more than we realize, even when we think it's not. And so how would we kind of become aware of that so as to root it out or release one more level of conditioning?
Well, I don't want to get into the game of thinking that there's a personality to be purified, but in terms of using something that reflects what's hidden. So looking at aspects of conditioned personality would be one way, and not actually taking it on board as trying to change the personality to be something better, but just simply recognize why certain patterns keep occurring, for example, because often we can be in a holding path of experiencing. It's like the same things come round and round again, time and time again. Why is that? Because of how we're feeding it invisibly.
Mm.
And so it isn't about trying to perfect our sense of self. It's like holding up what is not to the light so it can be clearly seen, allowed to be as it is, and not fed anymore.
Hmm. By fed, you would mean reinforced, sort of, yeah.
By behaviors, attitudes, subtle beliefs,
Yeah.
operating.
Well, I know it's sort of unfashionable to speak in terms of improving the personality, and I can see how that can be if that's one's sole focus, it can be a never-ending project, which can ultimately be very frustrating because that it's not adequate in and of itself. But that is not to say that, by at least one way of defining it, the personality does not become improved. I mean, wouldn't you say that over the years, as you've been releasing conditioned tendencies and habitual ways of reacting and responding to things, that could be construed as an improvement, an improved style of functioning in your life?
I guess that's one perspective,
Hmm.
but I don't see it in that way. It's like melting more and more into being,
Yeah,
melting more and more into that which is already awake, but not being in denial of our humanness.
right. But that melting more and more into that which is already awake is desirable. You appreciate the fact that that is taking place. You wouldn't voluntarily go back to where you were 5 years ago.
No, but is it really desirable, or is it just simply what is happening?
Both, I would say. you know, I mean, there is, as we started out. Go ahead.
Right. There isn't a desire to make it happen.
Right, but it's happening.
Right. And
Yeah.
if there is a desire, it's a desire for what is, and it's a desire to experience what is now clearly and not do anything to manipulate that.
Right. Oh, agreed. And by using the word desire, I'm not trying to say that, oh, I have to have this happen and I'm not going to be happy until it happens and all that stuff. I'm just saying that it's it's a nice thing. I mean, that's what I meant by the word desirable. It's there seems to be an evolutionary process taking place, and a clarification, an enrichment, a deepening, a letting go of conditioned tendencies which tend to obscure the more intuitive, natural flow of life. The kind of things you've been saying. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to clarify that because there is this sort of stigma in spiritual circles about the words self-improvement and so on, and rightfully so, because a lot of times that has been presented as the whole package. Be a better person, learn how to get diamond necklaces if you desire them, and it's all about sort of rearranging the furniture rather than
Yeah.
yeah.
And so this is really about just resting
Yes.
and not trying to manipulate anything, which by the very nature of that, truly seeing what is happening, it releases itself.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. There's a verse in the Gita, I won't quote the whole verse, but one key phrase of it is, what can restraint accomplish?
Ah,
Well, actually, a little bit more of the verse is, creatures act according to their own nature. What can restraint accomplish?
right.
Yeah. Good. So, okay, so we've covered, is that it, the book?
If it ever gets written.
Yeah, I'm helping
We'll
you here.
Yeah, I do feel that, that's going to probably cover a broad spectrum of things,
Hmm. I think
going
that'll be a
from
good book.
suffering to the full integration, following
Yeah.
the experiential recognition,
Hmm.
and make it a live journey. But we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think if you wait until full integration has happened with a capital F-I,
Oh,
you'll never finish the book.
right. Well, integration is an evolutionary process, shall we say, a
Right,
continuing evolutionary process.
right. Yeah, beautiful.
Mhm.
Okay, so what's going on with you these days? I mean, are you giving satsangs? Are you besides writing the book? Are you traveling? Do you talk to people on Skype in order
Yes,
to
definitely.
one-on-one kind of satsangs?
Definitely. I, respond to emails, to requests
Mm-hmm.
for connections on Skype. That seems to be the majority of what is happening right now. Um, there's a meeting here in the UK in Leicester next month, the middle of the month sometime with non-duality meetup.com, I think it is, through Nick Hyam, who's the organizer. He's organised a meeting on the weekend. So there's that. There's a meeting in Ireland towards the end of October. I've been invited there. So I will go anywhere within reason. If the costs can be covered, I will happily go anywhere.
Hmm.
So,
Do you
yeah.
manage to support yourself with this? I mean, do people pay a little fee if they have a consult with you, or go out, you do retreats and they pay a course fee or something?
I've not done a retreat as yet. I'm
Mm-hmm.
open to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I've been sustaining myself from my own financial means largely because I worked hard.
So you have some
Um,
savings or something?
right,
Uh-huh.
right. So that's where the majority of the support comes from. But people, if they see the value, and majority of people do see the value in what is shared, then they donate accordingly. And some people can't afford to donate, and of course that's fine too.
Yeah,
So it's available for whoever wants to inquire. Um, and that's it basically.
that's great. No, I appreciate that. I sort of operate the same way. I mean, I don't teach satsangs or anything, but just this whole interview show is available to whoever wants to listen to it. But there's a donation button, which I might as well mention, and people occasionally click that and send something in, and it's enabled me to buy equipment. And I'm actually going to attend the Science and Non-Duality conference in the fall in October in California by virtue of that support. So I very
Oh, great.
much appreciate that as well.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, I really appreciate this. It's really enjoyable to talk to you. Is there anything, you're probably going to say no, but is there anything you feel like we haven't touched upon that you'd like to mention?
No, not really. I just respond to whatever questions come up. So
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a great deal here unless a question gets asked.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and I want to thank you from my heart for this opportunity to share. Um, it's really wonderful, and yeah, it's just been a really beautiful way to spend a Sunday afternoon. So thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. It's mutual. And you respond very nicely to questions, by the way. I really feel like there's a very refreshing depth and clarity to your understanding. And it's very obviously experientially based, which is a point that you have emphasized during this conversation, that you're not just sort of speaking from having read a lot of books or anything. You're speaking from the heart, and that's great.
What else is there?
Yeah, and it'll be fascinating to see how things continue to unfold for you. Maybe in a year or two we can have another one of these, and maybe the book will be finished. In fact, when it is, send me a copy. I'll read it, and we'll have another conversation.
Sure, it would be an absolute delight.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm just available for anybody who wants to get in touch. If anybody feels they want to inquire, then I'm very open to sharing in that way. So,
good. And I'll link to your website from mine, so those listening, if they want to get in touch with Karen, go to batgap.com, and you'll see this interview posted there, and there'll be a link to her website. And there's obviously a way there to get in touch with you, right?
yes, there is. Yeah, there's a contact tab on the website and lots of free material as well. And there'll also be another podcast on the website within the next couple of days that Nick Hyams produced.
Great.
So,
Okay, thanks. Well, let me just make a couple of concluding points. So I've been speaking with Karen Richards from the UK. I'm in the US, she's in the UK. And this is a continuing series, these interviews, called Buddha at the Gas Pump. The implication being that these days, under very ordinary circumstances, you might meet very awakened people. And if you go to batgap.com, B-A-T-G-A-P, you'll see them all. You can sign up for an email newsletter there to be notified each time a new interview is posted. You can sign up for a podcast so you can listen on your iPod while you're doing other things. And there's also a little discussion group that crops up around every interview. People start posting comments and others respond, and sometimes the person I've interviewed comes in and responds to some of the comments. So I'll invite Karen to do that if there's anything that I think she might want to respond to. So thank you for listening or watching, and the next interview should be with Sharon Landreth, who lives in Colorado. And so we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.